Fun. Hey, we're here on the podcast with Mr. Scott H Silverman, who's the author of The Opioid Epidemic: What You Don't Know Will Destroy Your Family and Your Life. And Mr. Scott H Silverman, he's been fighting the good fight against addiction for over 20 years, one person, one speech, one book at a time. And we're going to have this conversation today about the opioid epidemic, about how Scott is an expert crisis coach and family navigator. He's a behavioral health consultant, an author, and a CNN hero. He has a website, yourcrisiscoach.com, and then, of course, the opioid epidemic that we'll mention again at the end. So, Mr. Scott, glad to be speaking with you.
Robert, it's really good to be here, and have this opportunity, because I believe every time I speak, we can reduce the stigma and encourage people to make a phone call, reach out for help, raise their hand. I need help. 3 of the hardest words in the English language. And I appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that's killing nearly 400 people a day in our country.
400 a day, that's huge. And I didn't even know that this was that big of a deal until I watched some John Oliver, and they were talking about like the Sackler family and all this crazy stuff. And I broke an ankle about 10 years ago. And when I was healing, I had a friend that had his sister was in a motorcycle accident, and the sister said, like, all the recovering from the injuries was one thing, but getting off the painkillers afterwards was like not even a comparison. And I kind of went through a similar issue. Like after the bodily injuries healed, getting off the painkiller, like I might be just like completely sick and knocked out for an entire day. And then even months later, the little cravings came back, and it was like, I was like, this is not harmless. This is some nasty stuff. And so it's real and it's scary, and all this addiction stuff, it like takes so much to understand all of it. So, I mean, help us, educate us. What should we know about addiction and about opioids and just this 400 deaths per day problem?
Well, first and foremost, the concept of one pill can kill, and we're in a whole different environment today than we were 10 years ago, simply because, and we haven't even mentioned fentanyl yet. Fentanyl is the opioid that has really, increased the overdose deaths in our country and around the world. And fentanyl, which is interesting, is a synthetic. It's not, like a pharmaceutical. So anybody can make fentanyl, and the precursors are made and created in China. And China generally exports to Mexico. Mexico breaks down the precursors and then creates the fentanyl in a powder form or a pill form. So, and then sometimes liquefying it to transport it here. And unfortunately, the U.S. is one of the largest consumers. So it's a major, major issue right now. And when you think about it, when I started this journey almost a decade ago on the opioid issue, the number was like 150 per day, which is, if you think about it, Robert, it's a plane crash. Now we're at 2 plane crashes a day, and over 70% of the overdoses are what's defined as accidental overdoses. What that means is somebody is at a party somewhere with some friends, and they're taking a pill that says Xanax on it, might even say, Tylenol, and it's laced with fentanyl. And the problem is the fentanyl that's going into these fabricated medications, if you will, illicit drugs, will kill you because it's a poison. It's not a party drug. So it's gotten out of hand to the point where so many young people are overdosing on this. And if you don't get the reversal drug naloxone quickly, you're going to expire. And that's why we're seeing the morbidity rate continue to go and grow. And right now in our country, last year, the number was around 100,000 people dying a year. Now they say there's a decrease. I don't know if I believe it, but I think there's, a trend of people wanting to feel better quicker. And that's what opioids have provided for them.
That's some scary stuff. When we're talking 2 plane crashes a day, we're talking a major city dying per year, and it being like slightly on the increase. It doesn't sound good. It sounds really scary. And so, as far as just understanding like how this happens, like how do people like fall into this? You mentioned that sometimes there's the being at the party, taking the drug, but as far as like, sometimes addiction creeps into people's lives, ruins lives. Like, what's your understanding of just the psychology behind it? How does it happen?
Well, if we go back a little bit further to, Oxycontin, which was the primary narcotic that was given to somebody who goes into an average, emergency department, has a break, has a fracture, has a lot of pain, a sprain, a really bad backache. It was being, just scripted out and given away, kind of like chapstick in the desert. So what happened was a lot of people got addicted to that opioid, but Oxycontin, was manufactured by the Sackler family, the Purdue company. And, it was seen as one of the best painkillers for those who weren't able to take morphine or didn't really require morphine. And when you go back even further, fentanyl was actually created to help cancer patients who had so much pain that the morphine wasn't working. But the theory was fentanyl was never going to leave the hospitals. It was only given through IV. And then, people who want to self-medicate, and of course the cartels who like to build a huge multi-billion-dollar business, started making fentanyl in a very, very large quantities around the world. So what happened was we started out with a prescription issue, and then major problems came. Studies showed that long-term use of OxyContin did not reduce pain, but in the mind, it people that were taking it felt like, I can't stop taking this. If I do, every time I do, I have pain. So we've learned a lot in the last 20 years, mostly the last 10 years. And of course, basically Purdue got shut down and the Sackler family got sued, but they've opened up their business in Europe doing the same thing. So the idea of, why is this happening? How is this happening? Is opioids are a very strong drug. I mean, everyone knows heroin. Heroin's been around forever, and it's an opioid. And cocaine was a really big drug, and still continues to be a big one. But what happens with the pill? It's easy to manufacture, and because fentanyl is a synthetic, and you can actually buy the precursors and the chemicals you need on the dark web, have them sent to your home, get a pill press on Amazon. I don't want to give anybody ideas. And you can make your own pills. And you can spend, you ready for this? You can spend $5,000 buying the ingredients, and you can sell it for $1 million. So there's so much money to be made in the sales of fentanyl and opioids. People got in the business very, very quickly. And, even with legalized marijuana growing around the country, the effect of an opioid is completely different than almost any other narcotic.
It almost gives you the creeps, just how easy it is. It's almost like Breaking Bad kind of math, right? Like the $5,000 to $1 million, and also how it just sounds like a game of whack-a-mole the way that you describe it, right? Like, well, it's more restricted in the U.S., but then it comes in through China and Mexico and the cartels. Well, they ban this company in the U.S., but then they go and make it in Europe. So it seems like a really just tricky situation. But it's good to know what's out there and what's happening. And I'm really curious about how you come into all this. Like, what is your background, expertise, experience with this whole situation?
Well, I'm going to go to that in a second, but I want to mention your Breaking Bad is a really good example. But even in that show, the fella who made the drugs was a chemist. He was an expert, and you don't have to be an expert to make fentanyl, and so that's what's made it so easily accessible and so motivating for people to get involved in manufacturing and distribution of fentanyl. So back to me, I'm an example of somebody in long-term recovery. I have tons of lived experience. I dabbled a lot in cocaine and hallucinogens and marijuana, but back in the, 70s, the level of THC in marijuana was like 9 points, and now it's closer to 90 points, 90% pure. So it's different. These are hallucinating type drugs. These are drugs that take people to a whole nother level of being under the influence. And I think what we saw, because I think you asked the question twice, I want to pinpoint. I think COVID, in my opinion, really showed. If the studies really aren't in yet because it's only been a couple of years since COVID's been over. But during COVID, so many people got into self-medicating, and I say self-medicating. I like the word anesthetizing ourselves. Depression, anxiety, sadness, catastrophic events, breaking up with having a bad golf game. It didn't matter. that we are a pill-oriented society, unfortunately. And most of us, and I was a good example, we want a quick fix. We're having a sad day. We don't want to call Robert Plank and, hey, Robert, what should I do? We want to fix it. And what I've learned as a crisis coach, because I work with families all the time, one of the things that the person who suffers the most, they're not making the phone call for help. It's the family member. And I've learned through my own personal journey of recovery, how to really get to a family and help a family and move quickly and try to get their loved one into the highest and best level of support and care, and encouraging people, to say, I need help. And for me, when I turned 30 and nearly died, I finally asked for help. And when I asked for help, it was amazing how many doors opened for me. But you don't think about that when you're under the influence. You don't think about that when you're drug seeking. You don't think about that when you're up for 3 or 4 days because of, methamphetamine or some other narcotic. And if you're feeling better in your mind because what you're taking is helping you feel better, you don't stop doing that until something catastrophic happens. And that's what's taking place now. It used to be, was it 8 years ago, everyone in the US, 1 out of 10, I should say, knew somebody who suffered from some level of overdose or potentially near-death experience with opioids or other medications like cocaine or illicit drugs. 2 years ago, the number was something like 1 in 4, and as of last year, the number now is 1 in 2. So almost half the country knows somebody who has expired or has had a bad experience with some form of overdose or illicit drugs. So when you think about that, extrapolate that data over the next 10 years, if we're not finding a way to deal with this like we did with COVID, we're going to have a real major problem. We're going to have the number going from 4 to 6 and 800 over the next 10 years when you look at the data.
And the way that you describe that, it really does sound like an epidemic. And I think around COVID, when ChatGPT first came out, and when you can ask it and have it help you extrapolate, I was asking it some of these questions like, well, what percentage of the population has addiction issues? And it seemed like kind of a slippery subject, right? Because it was like, well, this percent has alcohol use disorder, but then this other percent, they might abuse it and they don't even realize it's a problem, or they're keeping it secret. And so it's a really scary situation. And the way you put it, it's been around forever, but it's on the increase, and it's a very timely issue, right? With the pandemic mess with things, and with the fentanyl on the rise, and with the internet it being so accessible. I mean, I remember when I was a kid and it came out that the plans to build a nuclear bomb were on the internet, and I was thinking man, the world's over. But even scarier than that is that the chemistry instructions, right? You can kind of make your own drugs on the internet, so it's such spreads like wildfire. And as far as the whole, you mentioned about the family issue, and you hear these kind of phrases said like addiction is a family disease, right? That it can get sort of passed down, but then also the whole family gets upended. And it's I'm still not sure I fully understand. There's a lot of kind of awareness to be had about how if someone has an addictive personality or addiction issues, they're not a bad person. They didn't ask for this. They fell into it. And as far as overcoming the stigma, you said sometimes people are afraid to ask for help. It's really easy legally to criminalize all the stuff and to put that population aside. So do you have anything to share with us as far as getting a better understanding about addiction and what kind of just nuances there are as far as someone getting the help they need?
Well, let me take you back to the basic statistics, okay? And unfortunately, or fortunately, I have a lot of data. I'm the kind of guy nobody wants to take on a long trip in a motorhome because the information I have is overwhelming. And when I was writing the book, it took me 3 years. What I wasn't sure of, I got confirmed. So right now in our country, 15%, 15% of the country has an active addiction issue that will erupt over the next 12 months, okay? And of the 15% that have the active addiction issue, if you will, only 10% of those will seek help. And of the 10% that seek help, are you ready for this? If the average person goes into a 30-day residential treatment program and they do nothing else afterwards, 95% of them will relapse. So we have the statistic that roughly 5% of the individuals who seek help, if you will, will survive, if you will, and move into the recovery process. So that's a very, very small percentage. So pushing over to the family, if you will, because it's a disease, I think of it as a disease, and science calls it a disease, and it's a maladaptive behavior that can't be corrected through willpower. And it's not a moral failing, it's actually a disease. And the one parallel I like to draw to it is when you think about diabetes, nobody chooses diabetes. Diabetes chooses us, if you will. But the difference is when you go for help for diabetes, you immediately get blood work done. The doctor will evaluate what's going on and they'll prescribe a dose, if you will, of insulin and ways to monitor your insulin level throughout the day. And you can live a normal life. When somebody goes in and raises their hand and says they have a drinking problem or they have a drug problem, they're kind of shunned, if you will, and they basically don't get the kind of help unless they're really, really motivated. And the family disease part is, listen to this statistic, for every active addict out there today, okay, they will negatively impact almost 9 people every day. So if you're an active addict, okay, let's take the 15% of the country, roughly 50 million people. If you're active, and meaning you're either under the influence or you're abusing substances or you're impaired the next day from the use of those substances, you will negatively impact almost 9 people every day. That means you're impaired, your personality will change, your sleep patterns will change, you will be arguing with people, you'll have impacts at work. And of course, if you're really impaired and you're on the road, then you're driving a big weapon around that potentially threatens others. So when you start to move the data around and look at the facts, we've got a major issue in this country. And the U.S., unfortunately, has some of the worst outcomes when you think about the level of addiction. It's not that, it's in our water, but it's in the population. When there's 15% that have it, it's not like COVID where you can spread it around the room, but it impacts the whole family because the whole family is impacted by it. So unfortunately, until somebody seeks help and gets help or wants help and needs help and seeks help, the problem will only grow because you can't fix this on your own. You can't start doing push-ups. You can't change your diet. You can't start meditating. You need to really get professional support or go into one of the recovery fellowships. So there's hope and there's help and there's solutions, but it's not the kind of information you see on the news on a daily basis because it's not talked about. Because a lot of people believe simply, they'd say to me, Scott, if you stop drinking, you wouldn't have a drinking problem. And that's not true for me. I've got this disease. My mind tells me it's okay to drink. My mind tells me it's okay to do drugs. So I stay very close to my own recovery on a daily basis.
Well, we definitely need this kind of education. I wish they taught it in schools. And like you say, I wish it was on the news, but it's such a tricky situation. And there is a lot of stigma and it is very bleak and there isn't a quick fix. And just some of these statistics that you're mentioning, they are helpful to me as far as just kind of waking up to this crazy reality, especially in America, right? You affect 9 people per day regularly. And then this idea of 15% have an active addiction, and then only 10% will get help, and only 5% will stay on the wagon. And so, as far as solving this, or maybe not solving this problem, but like handling this problem, right? Managing it, doing our best to be back on the upswing. If someone has this addiction issue, or you say that many times, like the family are the ones that are aware, and they need to seek some of these treatments that you mentioned. What are some next steps, and how do we do our best to ensure success? Because maybe sometimes you tell the addict that they need help, or you do your best, and it can be frustrating, right? You might fall into like enabling land. So what is your advice as far as the sticky situation of trying to or improve the issue?
Well, first I'm gonna give out my personal cell number, and that's the number I want people to call, and then I'll help them guide, if you will, or navigate next steps. And my phone number, my cell, 619-993-2738. 619-993-2738. Call me, text me, Google me, Scott H Silverman, and you'll see a lot of information there. Secondly, you can go online. If you think one of your loved ones or someone you work with or a colleague or a significant other or a sibling might have a problem, you can go online and Google, what does addiction look like? Does my loved one have a problem if they're drinking, 3 bottles of wine a day? I see weight loss. I see behavioral shifts. I see an attitude that I can't understand, the level of impatience, the way they're talking to me, their tone, their tenor. Most people know when someone else isn't feeling well, especially if they know them. So those are some of the signs. If you see them, don't ignore them. Now, let's shift back to the person who has the issue. This is a disease of denial, this disease of addiction. So think about that for a second. The person who has the problem, the person who's self-medicating, they don't even believe they have a problem. They think if everybody else were to stay in line, or, the president would do it this way, or my wife would, I like to joke, my wife is in the room breathing. If she wasn't in the room breathing, I wouldn't be irritated. By the way, as a footnote, today's my wedding anniversary. And we were joking about that this morning. So they don't know they have the problem. And if they think they have the problem, they're immediately going to deny it. So it's very difficult. And the language that you need to use, or the way you frame your conversations when you're talking to a loved one, you really need to get some education. There is a ton of information on the internet on how to approach, questions to ask. There's actually even a questionnaire. You can go online to, Alcoholics Anonymous and say, or just Google quiz to find out if I have an alcohol problem. And the test will pop up. It's like 21 questions. And if you're generally going online and you're checking it, someone has a problem or someone actually has the problem. So it's not hard to figure out. But what's really hard is to figure out next steps. It's not like a broken arm. It's not like a root canal you need. It's not like a cavity. It's not like your hair is falling out. It's really hard. It's very opaque. And then once you remove the anesthesia, if you will, the mood altering substances, the self-medicating substances, then you have the underlying issues that have been driving it. Untreated trauma, mental health issues, depression, PTSD. So unfortunately, there's a lot to unwrap here. But there is hope, there is help, and most people who take the initiative to seek help will do well. They might have a relapse or two, and that happens, but once they get a little information, they can do a lot with it. So in that respect, we can really look at reducing the morbidity rate and helping our loved ones, because they're just basically killing themselves slowly. And the idea of one pill can kill, because fentanyl is so easy to get, because fentanyl is a poison, because it's a synthetic, and because anyone can make it, and anyone can buy the precursors and literally have them shipped to their house through the mail, unbeknownst to the carrier. So that's the scary part. And that's the part that we need to be letting people know. And the median age of someone who's overdosing has dropped every year for nearly 4 years. So we're seeing it's the number one killer right now of, 15, I believe, to 35-year-olds in this country is overdosing.
That's very frightening. So it seems like or one of the answers here is to be educated on it. Kind of like how you're educating us now. You're giving us these statistics. You have your book, The Opioid Epidemic, and then some of these helpful resources.
Google me. Google Scott H Silverman. You'll find me. And you're right. There are a lot of resources out there today, Robert, that didn't exist 10 years ago. But first, because it's a disease of denial and the inability to feel feelings, generally it's like I said, most of the calls I get are from family members or friends or lovers or work, force colleagues who are calling me to say, I have a friend, that owns you, I have a friend. But they're seeing the behavior before the other person is, because the other person is anesthetizing themselves. They're under the influence in most waking hours if they're at that extreme part of the path. So it's that other person who needs to help understand how to help. And it's not that hard. And this is preventable. And we can find ways to support each other and help each other and talk about it. And you don't hear the government talk about it. I mean, it's just, we're talking about a lot of different things, and I don't want to get political, but we need to be talking about this. just as much. And right now, Kennedy, who's our, director of health and human services, publicly shared that he's in recovery 42 years. So we have somebody in the White House who supposedly, has that experience and should be able to convey that at a higher level. And you're right. Prevention and education is the best tool. Prevention and education is the best tool.
Very nice. So it's up to us to get educated and to say, I want to know more about this. I need more understanding. And apologies for getting that phone number wrong. That's 619-993-2738. And you also dropped a couple of helpful Google searches that we should put in there, because some of these activities like searching Google, listening to a podcast, it's maybe one step closer to making that phone call, right? It's less scary. You can just say, well, I'm just kind of doing a little bit of investigating. So you said, Google, what does addiction look like? That way you can understand what you're around or what might be happening to you. And then that other Google search, quiz to find out if I have an alcohol problem. And Scott, I'm always impressed by people like you that have kind of like dedicated their lives and say, hey, I'll drop anything, call me. I'm looking to save a life, basically, because it can be a downward slope if someone gets hooked and like their life just kind of continues to go into shambles, right? They take some pills, lose their job, dealing with the emotions, lose their relationship, dealing with the emotions again. It can go downhill very quickly, and we need to help some people out. So he said that phone number is 619-993-2738. And then as far as this book, The Opioid Epidemic, can you give us a quick elevator pitch on that? Why someone would check that out and how that can help?
The idea of the book, and it was actually called a different title when I started, but I ended up shifting it over because the opioid crisis was just overwhelming. And in that book are some examples of what a family can do, how to, the things that we've discussed today. So those tools are there. But to keep it simple for people, if they go, I don't know, I can't remember what he said, where should I go? Go to my website, yourcrisiscoach.com, or just Google Scott H Silverman. Because of the things that I've been doing, on the social media platform, the things I've been doing on the news, and I try to do it seasonally. Spring break's coming up, how to stay sober during spring break, so to speak. So the idea of all the nuggets I've kind of packaged in the book. It's like a toolkit. It's an easy read. I get criticized because it was written at a 6th grade level, and they go, how did you choose that? And they go, well, I didn't really go to college and spend time there. So I think at a 6th grade level, plus I want it to be easy for the average person to pick up and look at. But again, I have a ton of information on my website that will give you some nuggets of where to start and how to go. And if you need more, you call or text me and we'll figure something out. I mean, I do that for free. I mean, I'm a professional coach, and if you want to extend the information that we share, we can certainly do that. But I offer, at least 10 minutes to anybody who calls me. And I'm one of those people, when I see a strange number in my phone, Robert, I answer it because to me, it's a chance to maybe help save a life. And you know what? If I could figure out a way to do this all for free, I'd do it. We got to make a living, but I run a treatment center here in San Diego, Confidential Recovery. We work with a lot of veterans. We have a nonprofit called the Veterans Navigation Center. We work with veterans, and now, as of January 2025, we're now working with active military as well, who suffer from substance use disorders or are having untreated trauma around their experience in the military. So we want to help. And if I can't help you, I'll find you a way to get some help.
Very nice. I'm very admiring your dedication to this. And this is Scott H Silverman. That website is yourcrisiscoach.com. And Scott, I find it very enlightening how it's all interrelated, right? You mentioned about like different kinds of addictions, and it's like, well, if alcohol was never invented, the addict mind would find something else. And you mentioned how the kind of addiction, it's a way to put a wrapping around the family trauma or around the mood disorder. And so it's a lot to unpack, and we only scratch the surface. But if someone says, well, I need help or need someone who I love to get help, then yourcrisiscoach.com is the place to go to check out all those resources. Grab your 7 tips to erase the stigma of addiction, and you can find out all about the book and the phone number and that rehab facility in San Diego. And as far as putting a nice ending on this conversation here, Scott, it's time for the slightly scary part of the show where I try to put you on the spot a little bit. I ask for a fun or a helpful quote or lesson that has served you in life that you can pass on to us. So, what comes to mind for you as far as a quote or lesson?
Well, when you asked me that earlier, the first thing that came to mind is it's pretty simple. If you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always gotten. Time for change.
Yes, time to make that change by going to yourcrisiscoach.com. Find that phone number there. The Opioid Epidemic, written by Mr. Scott H. Silverman. Thank you very much, Mr. Scott, for showing up and having this uncomfortable conversation, but uncomfortable in a good way because people need to be woken up about this slightly every single year increase 2 plane crashes a day. It's scary stuff. We need to be educated. So thank you for educating us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
All right, super.